This is lesson 8, translating to y equals mx plus b. This is activity 3, translating a line. And I'm going to break this activity 3 up into 2 parts because I'm going to go into more detail than what the authors expect us or me to do as a way of reviewing some things that we've done in the past. So this is part 1, which is translating line A to line H, and then looking at different forms of the equation for line H. So let's start out. Here's what they give you in the beginning. And they tell you that line A goes through 0, 0. So what that means is that line A is a graph of a proportional relationship. And that proportional relationship goes through point 4, 1. So the x value is 4, the x coordinate is 4, and the y coordinate is 1. And they tell you that image of line A is under translation. That's H. So H is a translation of line A. So what that means is that they took line A and they just moved it down to where line H is. And so that's a translation. It's a move in which both of the lines are parallel. We did this in the last lesson to demonstrate that when you translate lines, they remain parallel. So that means that for every unit along the x-axis, it's changing in the same way along the y-axis. So parallel lines have the same slope. All right, so line A, because it's proportional, you can just look at the coordinates and tell what the slope is. That's called the constant of proportionality. So for proportional relationships, the slope is the constant of proportionality. So that's just simply the y value divided by the x value of the coordinates. So y divided by x equals the constant of proportionality equals 1 divided by 4 equals 1/4. So to this point, that's pretty much 7th grade stuff, and it's pretty straightforward. It's a nice way to review that. I don't want to say that it's easy. But you can get there. All right. So now what can we figure out for H? And so to figure out the slope, you have to figure out what is the change in the vertical direction. So how many units do you have in the vertical direction compared to the number of units in the horizontal direction? So we started calling this the change in the vertical direction, or the change in the y value compared to the change in the horizontal direction, which is the change in the x value. And so the change in the horizontal direction, so you have to look at where you start. So you start at 0 and you end at 4. So what is that change? Well, that's the difference between where you end, 4, minus where you started. That's 0. So 4 minus 0 is 4. So this is the nice thing about when it's against the y-axis. You can actually just read the x value as 4. That is the same as the change. But the y value is different. You have to think about that change as, where do you start? You start at -5. And where do you end? You end at -4. So this is a review of adding and subtracting positive and negative numbers from 7th grade. So you start at -5, you end at -4. So what's that change? Well, it's where you end, -4, minus where you started. That's minus a -4. And you might remember from earlier that to figure this out, you're going to use the inverse operation, which is addition, and now you're going to use the additive inverse of -5, which is +5. So it's an inverse and an inverse, but in this case, it's the inverse operation, and it's the additive inverse of -5, which again is +5. So that's -4 plus +5. And this is going to come back when we write the equation. But -4 plus +5 is a +1. So the change in the vertical direction is 1 unit. The change in the horizontal direction is 4 units. So that 1 divided by 4 gives you this same slope. And it has to. It's a translation. The lines are parallel. They have the same slope. Now the authors don't expect you to go through this. They don't expect you to write the equation. We are going to take some time and write the equation because it's a review of what we did before. What the authors are expecting you to do is to look at this, realize that the slope is 1/4. So that's 1/4 times the units in the horizontal direction. So y is equal to 1/4 the units in the horizontal direction, plus you have to include where this crosses the y-axis. That's called the y-intercept, or the vertical intercept. In this case, it's -5. Now, I would suggest that when you look at this is just lots of complicating things when you look at this problem. I would suggest that you rewrite this instead of 1/4 x minus 5, rewrite it as 1/4 x plus a -5, because that's what you're doing here. You're adding -5 to this, because this y coordinate in this case is a -5. So 1/4 x plus a -5. You're going to find at the end it's going to make it a little bit easier to look at these possibilities down here. All right, so let's go back to here. You might remember that the right side of the equation, so we wrote equations a while ago, and we talked about the left side being the y's and the x's, and the right side being the slope. Well, we just figured out the slope. The slope is 1/4. So now we have to figure out the left side of the equation, which are the y's and the x's. And so we had to look at this slope triangle as if we're moving it to rest along the x-axis here. So we're going to add 5 units to these 2 points. And so this is going to go up to a +1, and this point right here is going to go to the x-axis. So that tells you that the number of units in the vertical direction is that 1 unit. So you have to take this point, -4, and add 5 to it. So that's why it's y plus 5. So when you're figuring out the coordinates for the equation, you're going to take the y value and you're going to subtract -5. Well, that's just, and right here, the y value and subtract -5. That's like adding 5 units to it. That's like shifting this up 5 units. So that's where this y plus 5 comes from. Shifting this up, or looking at this as -4 minus a -5. So this is visually, and this would be mathematically what's going on. Regardless, you're going to get y plus 5. And what's that compared to? That's compared to the change along the x-axis. So that's the 4 units along the x-axis. So it's y plus 5 compared to x. So because this rests along the y-axis, x is just the number of units. X is the change in the horizontal direction. So that change, this is the change in the vertical direction, this is the change in y. We know that's 1 unit. This is the change in x. We know that's 4 units. So y plus 5 over x equals 1/4. And that tells you that this y plus 5, the number of units in the vertical direction, is 1/4 the number of units in the horizontal direction. So this y plus 5 is going to equal 1/4 the number of units in the horizontal direction. So now we can test it. We can look at a couple of numbers. Oh, actually, I'm sorry. So y, if you add 5 to y, then to get the coordinate that's the y value for this point, that should be this point right here. If you added 5 to go up to here, then you have to subtract that 5 to go back down to this point right here. So y is going to equal 1/4 x minus 5. You have to subtract this 5. So now we can test a couple of points. And this is the issue in learning mathematics, is continue to ask yourself, does it make sense? Do I know what's happening? And look for places to review, to check yourself. And so if you look at this point right here, and if you add 5 to it, the y value for this point right here is -3. So this is at -3. If I add 5 to that -3, where do I end up? Well, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I end up at +2. So a -3 plus 5 is +2. And what that says is that the change in the vertical direction, so the y, the number of units along the y-axis are 2 units, and the number of units in the horizontal direction are 8 units. Well, what's 2 divided by 8 is equal to 1/4, that same slope. Another way of looking at that, this says that 1/4 the value of x is going to equal that 2 units. We took y, -3, we added 5 to it, got to +2. So 1/4 times what number equals 2? Well, 1/4 of 8 equals 2. So that checks. Do the same thing with this point right here. This point has a y coordinate of -2. So it's right here, -2. Now what happens if we add 5 to that? -2 plus 5 is a +3. So this says that y plus 5, so -2 plus 5 is +3. So 3 is 1/4 of what number? Well, 1/4 of 12 equals 3. 12 divided by 4 equals 3. So if you go up to this point here, the number of units in the vertical direction are 3 units. The number of units in the horizontal direction is 12 units. So 3 divided by 12 is the same as 1/4. So you're just checking yourself with a couple other points. So now we can look at these different forms of the equation and figure out which ones match this line h right here. And the first one we know does, and that's 1/4 x. The slope is 1/4 x plus -5. That's the same as 1/4 x minus 5 right here. Now if you wrote it as plus -5, this one does not match because this says 1/4 x plus 5. Well, it's not 1/4 x plus 5, it's 1/4 x minus 5 or plus a -5. So this one doesn't match. C does, however, because all they've done with C is they've taken y and they've moved it over to the right side of the equation and taken what's on the right side of the equation and moved it over to the left side of the equation. You can do that. This is like a balance. So if you take this amount and you move it to the left and take this amount and move it to the right, they are still equal to each other. They're balanced. So that works. This is like flipping the relationship. So now you're going to figure out x is equal to how much as you move all these terms to the right side and are left with just x on the left side. That's flipping the relationship. That's looking for x equals how much compared to up here y equals how much. All right, next one, D. This is where it's helpful to rewrite this as adding a -5 because that's what you're doing here. You're adding a -5 to 1/4 the value of x. Now it doesn't change the answer. The order in which you add these does not change the answer. So you're just changing the order. So you're taking -5, adding 1/4 x. That's going to give you the same answer as taking 1/4 x and adding -5. So D matches. And E is simply, once again, just taking this amount and flipping it over the equal sign to the other side and taking y and flipping it over to the right side. So again, this is like a balance. Doesn't matter what side you sit on. You can still remain balanced. So E matches. And F is 5 minus 1/4 x, or 5 plus a -1/4 x. And that's not right. It's actually a -5 plus a positive 1/4 x, not a positive 5 plus a -1/4 x or minus 1/4 x. So this one does not match. And so one last thing, what they're trying to do is to get you just to recognize what the slope is. The slope in this case is the value that repeats, and it's the value that moves. That's m. So in this case, it was 1/4. So for 4 units in the x direction, you moved 1 unit in the y direction. 4 units in the x direction, 1 unit in the y direction. So that amount repeats. Now you can also look at this as 1 unit in the x direction, or 1 unit in the horizontal direction, 1/4 of a unit in the y direction. 1 unit, 1/4, 1 unit, 1/4, 1 unit, 1/4. So that 1/4 repeats throughout. So that's the slope, and it gives you the idea of movement along that line. Now they don't know where the M came from or the B came from, but somebody along the way just suggested, well, let's use M for meaning to move. So that's what happens with to use the x value to figure out what y is. It's 1/4 of whatever the x value is. But you also have to remember to add the beginning amount, which is the where it crosses the y-axis or the vertical axis, and call that the y-intercept or the vertical intercept. So that's the beginning amount. And in this case, it was -5, which was rewritten as subtracting a +5 or subtracting 5. So we're going to get to here. This is the point of this lesson, and much of what we're going to do throughout the rest of 8th grade is to understand how to use this equation.